Americans built amusement parks the way they built dreams, big, loud, and completely certain they'd last forever. Some of them did, a lot of them didn't, and a surprising number of the ones that didn't are still sitting right where they were left, slowly falling apart, rusting into the ground, while everybody debates what to do with them. Today we're counting down 10 famous American amusement parks that are slowly being abandoned. Number 10, Joyland Amusement Park, Wichita, Kansas. Joyland opened on June 12, 1949, and for over 5 decades, it was the kind of park that Wichita families took completely for granted in the best possible way. It was the largest amusement park in central Kansas, a straightforward, unpretentious local landmark with roller coasters, a Ferris wheel, a carousel, and the kind of rides that didn't require a 2-hour drive or a $300 entry fee. For generations, Joyland was just there, a reliable constant, the place you went on a hot summer Saturday when you didn't need anything fancy. It had one of the last surviving original wooden roller coasters in the region, a structure that had been thrilling and terrifying Kansans in roughly equal measure since the Truman administration. The park was not glamorous. It was not trying to compete with Six Flags or Cedar Point. It was a hometown institution that understood exactly what it was and made no apologies for it. Then, in 2004, a 13-year-old girl fell from the Ferris wheel. The park closed temporarily for the investigation. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission got involved. The park never reopened for that season, and after years of hoping and false starts and various owners stepping in and stepping back out again, it officially closed for good in 2006. What was left behind became one of the most photographed abandoned amusement parks in the Great Plains, which is both a testament to how much people loved it and a fairly depressing commentary on what happens when nobody can agree on what to do with a piece of land everyone remembers fondly. Vandalism, theft, and fire moved through the structures over the years like they had a schedule to keep. The famous Wacky Shack Dark ride, a beloved staple for kids who were too young for the roller coaster, was gutted. The carousel building collapsed. The wooden coaster, which had been one of the park's most notable features, was damaged repeatedly and left unrepaired. By the time a new development plan was finally approved, focusing on retail and residential use, there wasn't much of the original Joyland left to mourn except the memory of it, which for a place people loved, that much is probably the worst kind of loss. Number 9, Chippewa Lake Park, Chippewa Lake, Ohio. If you want to talk about patience, consider Chippewa Lake Park, which opened in 1878 and ran for exactly 100 years before closing in 1978. 100 years. That is not a park that failed. That is a park that outlasted practically everyone who ever worked there and most of the people who ever visited it. Chippewa Lake, a resort community about 50 miles southwest of Cleveland, had been a popular summer destination since the late 19th century, and the amusement park was the anchor of the whole thing. At its peak, it drew enormous crowds from across the Midwest. Roller coasters, a dance pavilion, a carousel, boating on the lake, summer cabins, the full experience of a lakeside resort from an era before central air conditioning made staying home comfortable. By the 1970s, larger regional parks with bigger budgets and more aggressive marketing were pulling the crowds away. Attendance declined. The park closed. And then, in a move that became almost legendary among people who document abandoned places, essentially, everything was left exactly where it was. For nearly 30 years, the ride stood untouched in the Ohio woods. The roller coaster frame aged through seasons of rain and snow and summer heat. The dance hall roof sagged and eventually gave way. Nature moved in with all the enthusiasm nature has for reclaiming things that humans have stopped paying attention to. Urban explorers and abandoned park enthusiasts treated the decaying grounds like a cathedral, photographing the peeling paint and rusted steel with a reverence that the park's original operators probably would not have fully understood. Demolition of the remaining structures finally began in 2010, but by then, Chippewa Lake Park had already accumulated a kind of legendary status among people fascinated by decay. Its eerie century-long life, followed by its equally long death, made it one of the most discussed abandoned amusement parks in American history. Number 8. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park, Princeton, West Virginia. This is where the list takes a turn, because Lake Shawnee isn't just an abandoned amusement park. It's an abandoned amusement park built on top of an ancient Native American burial ground, on land where children from a settler family were killed and kidnapped in 1783, and where at least 2 children later died in accidents during the park's actual operation. If someone handed you this land with its full history attached and asked whether you wanted to build an amusement park on it, the correct answer is no. Proprietor Conley Snidow Sr. purchased the property and opened the park in 1926. The park featured a Ferris wheel, swing rides, a swimming area, a dance hall, a racetrack, and cabins for overnight stays. For local families in Mercer County, it was a genuine summer destination, and for decades, it was simply a pleasant place to spend a weekend. Then the accident started. A young girl was killed when a delivery truck backed into the path of the swing ride. 2 drowning deaths occurred on the property. The park failed a health inspection and closed in the late 1960s. The land sat empty for years until Gaylord White purchased it in 1985, planning to subdivide it for residential development. Construction crews broke ground and immediately started finding things they weren't supposed to find. The remains of a Native American burial site, including skeletal remains of children. White halted the development, kept the land intact, and briefly reopened the park for 3 years before closing it again. Archaeologists from Marshall and Concord colleges excavated the property in 1988 and found 13 skeletons, most of them children, estimating there may be as many as 3,000 Native American burials on the grounds. The site now operates seasonal guided tours and paranormal events. The Travel Channel has ranked it one of the most terrifying places in America. The rusty Ferris wheel and the old swing set are still standing, exactly where they've always been, surrounded by vegetation and the accumulated weight of everything that happened on that land before, during, and after anyone called it an amusement park. Number 7. Dogpatch USA, Marble Falls, Arkansas. Dogpatch USA was a theme park built around a comic strip, which is either a charming idea or an obviously doomed one depending on when you ask the question and how well you understand franchise life cycles. The park opened in 1968 in the Ozark Mountains near Marble Falls, Arkansas, built around Lil Abner, the satirical comic strip created by Al Cap that ran from 1934 to 1977, and at its peak, appeared in over 900 newspapers worldwide. The park featured attractions, architecture, and characters inspired by the fictional rural community of Dogpatch. And in its early years, it drew a solid regional tourist audience out to a genuinely scenic corner of the Ozarks. The surrounding mountains were beautiful, the concept was genuinely distinctive, and for a while, the novelty of an entire themed environment dedicated to a nationally famous comic strip was enough draw to make it work. Then Lil Abner ended its newspaper run in 1977, without a living, active franchise backing it. No new strips, no film, no television presence keeping the characters in front of new audiences. A theme park themed around a retired comic strip was left trying to sell nostalgia for something that most younger visitors had no connection to, and many older visitors were already forgetting. Attendance declined through the 1980s. Management struggled with both finances and the fundamental problem of what the park actually was, without a thriving source material. In 1993, after 25 years, Dogpatch USA closed permanently. efforts to convert the property into something else, a water park, a resort, went nowhere, each plan dissolving before anyone broke ground. The original park cost approximately $1.3 million to construct, and most of that investment quietly dissolved into the Arkansas woods over the following years. What makes Dogpatch worth thinking about isn't just the abandonment, it's the specific lesson it illustrates about building a major attraction around something whose future you can't control. Building a theme park around an active franchise is already extremely difficult. Building one around a franchise that's going to quietly retire 9 years after you open is, in retrospect, a fairly instructive exercise in inadequate long-term planning. Number 6, Lincoln Park, Dartmouth, Massachusetts. Lincoln Park opened in 1894 in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, making it one of the older parks on this list in terms of longevity. For most of the following 93 years, it was exactly what a local amusement park is supposed to be: imperfect, beloved, constantly under financial pressure, and impossible to imagine not being there. It grew incrementally over the decades. Roller coasters, carnival rides, a dark ride called the Wacky Shack, a hall of mirrors, the kinds of attractions that a park acquires slowly over time, each one reflecting a different era of what people found exciting or scary or worth the price of a ticket. There was no grand theme, no corporate identity, no mascot in a costume greeting you at the gate. The theme was summer. For the families of southeastern Massachusetts and Rhode Island, it was simply the place you went, the same way that every region of the country had one place that was simply where you went. In the 1980s, the original owners passed away. The park was sold for the first time in its nearly century-long history. The new owner introduced admission fees. Lincoln Park had operated without a gate charge for years, collecting revenue from individual ride tickets instead, and the change immediately alienated a segment of the loyal local visitors who had simply walked in and out of the park their entire lives without being charged for the privilege of entering. Famous rides were auctioned off. The character of the place, that accumulation of decades of small decisions made by people who cared about it, began to dissolve faster than anyone who loved the park would have liked. In 1987, just a year after the new ownership took over, Lincoln Park closed for good. The structures sat on the Massachusetts coastline, gradually deteriorating, while redevelopment discussions went in circles for years. 93 years of a park that never pretended to be anything other than what it was, ended by a single bad ownership transition and an admission fee that rubbed the community the wrong way. There are lessons in there somewhere, though they're not very cheerful ones. Number 5, Geauga Lake, Aurora, Ohio. Geauga Lake had been operating in some form since 1887, which means it survived 2 world wars. What it could not survive was Six Flags' accounting department. The park had grown steadily over more than a century into one of the most beloved regional amusement parks in the Midwest. The Big Dipper roller coaster arrived in 1925 and became a regional icon. Water park attractions were added over the decades. The park had the kind of lived-in quality that only comes from 100 years of incremental growth. Not sleek or maximally efficient, but genuinely its own thing, shaped by a specific place and a specific community over a very long time. In 2001, Six Flags purchased Geauga Lake along with the adjacent SeaWorld Ohio and attempted to combine them into a single massive attraction called Six Flags Worlds of Adventure. The strategy looked ambitious on paper. Six Flags, however, had been on an acquisition binge through the late 1990s, buying parks across the country and financing the whole enterprise with levels of debt it could not realistically service. The combined Geauga Lake and SeaWorld operation never produced the returns the company needed. Cedar Fair, which operates Cedar Point, one of the premier amusement parks in the world, located about an hour away on Lake Erie, purchased the struggling property from Six Flags in 2004 at a significantly reduced price. Cedar Fair renamed it back to Geauga Lake, tried to operate it as a second destination alongside Cedar Point, and discovered what should perhaps have been apparent from the beginning. Running a competitive regional park in the direct shadow of one of the greatest amusement parks on the planet is not a viable long-term business model. Geauga Lake closed permanently in 2007, ending 120 years of operation. The city of Aurora purchased the largely dormant property in 2024 with plans to transform it into a public park, beaches, a pool, and non-motorized boating on the lake, which is, in a quiet way, a return to what Geauga Lake was before the roller coasters arrived. Sometimes the story goes in a circle. Number 4. Opryland USA, Nashville, Tennessee. Opryland USA is the entry on this list that makes people the angriest because, unlike most of the parks here, it didn't close because it was struggling. It closed because a shopping mall was more profitable. The park opened in 1972, built around the Grand Ole Opry and the broader Opryland Entertainment Complex in Nashville. It blended Southern musical culture and traditional amusement park attractions in a way that was genuinely distinctive. Live performance stages, themed areas reflecting Southern history and music, 4 roller coasters, and an identity that couldn't have been replicated anywhere else in the country. It was Nashville's park in the specific civic sense that a place becomes yours when you grew up going there. Gaylord Entertainment, the company that owned Opryland, decided in 1997 that the land was worth more as retail and entertainment real estate than as an amusement park. Opryland USA closed on December 31, 1997. Opry Mills, a large shopping mall, opened on the same property in 2000. Almost nothing physical remained to indicate that a beloved regional amusement park had existed there for 25 years. No landmark preserved, no monument, no acknowledgement. There's nothing that replaced it. One former Opryland employee told a Nashville publication years after the closure, "You can get a pretzel at the mall, but it's not the same thing." That sentiment, expressed with exactly that level of frustrated understatement, probably captures what most former visitors felt, better than any longer explanation could. The 4 roller coasters that had operated at Opryland were sold and relocated to other parks. The rest was simply gone. Decisions like the one Gaylord Entertainment made in 1997 are entirely legal and often financially sensible, which does not make them any less infuriating to the people who grew up somewhere that ceased to exist because someone ran the numbers. Number 3, Disney's River Country, Bay Lake, Florida. Disney's River Country is on this list because it is genuinely strange. Even by the generous standards of strangeness this list has established, it is an abandoned theme park inside Walt Disney World. Walt Disney World, which has a documented policy of never letting anything look neglected. Walt Disney World, which has an entire team dedicated to painting, repainting, and maintaining every surface visible to guests at all times. That Walt Disney World. River Country opened on June 20th, 1976, as Walt Disney World Resort's first water park. Themed as a rustic, old-fashioned swimming hole inspired broadly by the works of Mark Twain, it featured water slides, rope swings, a sandy-bottomed lake area, and a natural-feeling lagoon using filtered water drawn from Bay Lake. It was genuinely innovative for its time, one of the earliest themed water parks in the country. And for the first decade of its existence, it was a popular addition to the Disney World experience. By the late 1990s, River Country had been entirely eclipsed by what Disney itself had built. Typhoon Lagoon, which opened in 1989, and Blizzard Beach, which opened in 1995, were larger, more elaborate, more heavily themed, and safer in the sense that they use conventional filtration systems rather than drawing directly from a natural lake. River Country's rustic natural water approach, once a selling point, had become a liability as awareness of waterborne illness risks increased. On November 2, 2001, River Country closed for its routine winter refurbishment. It never reopened. Disney initially stayed silent about whether it would come back, which produced years of speculation. A 1980 Associated Press report had documented the death of an 11-year-old boy who contracted a brain-attacking amoeba found in Florida freshwater after visiting river country. Disney never confirmed that this was a factor in the decision to close. In January 2005, more than 3 years after the closure, the company officially announced that river country was done permanently. What followed was the unusual part. For years, the abandoned water park sat on the shores of Bay Lake, visible to guests on Disney resort boats. Slides, structures, and portions of the pool area could be seen from the water, slowly being reclaimed by Florida vegetation. The closing music continued to play automatically in the empty park on a programmed loop. The lights turned themselves on and off on a timer. Nobody was there to hear any of it. Disney eventually announced plans for a new resort on the site, Reflections, a Disney Lakeside Lodge, and construction began in 2019 before being quietly paused. As of 2026, the site is partially cleared and the resort remains unbuilt. Number 2, Six Flags, New Orleans, Louisiana. Six Flags, New Orleans might be the most photographed abandoned structure in the United States that isn't a building. The rusting skeleton of the Mega Zeph wooden roller coaster, visible from Interstate 510 on the eastern edge of New Orleans, became one of the most recognizable images of Hurricane Katrina's lasting damage. A physical monument to disaster, municipal indecision, and 2 decades of failed redevelopment plans stacked on top of each other. The park opened in May 2000 under the name Jazzland Theme Park. It went bankrupt within 2 seasons. Six Flags acquired it out of bankruptcy in 2002, signed a 75-year lease with the city, and invested $20 million in upgrades. The renamed Six Flags New Orleans was by most accounts doing reasonable business as one of the larger regional parks in the Gulf South. Plans for a water park addition were in development for the 2005 season. The last day the park operated was August 21st, 2005, 8 days before Hurricane Katrina made landfall. The storm flooded the 227-acre property under 7 to 12 feet of water. The floodwaters remained for over a month due to a drainage pump failure. When they finally receded, Six Flags declared the park a total loss. The company attempted to recover $150 million from insurers and largely failed because most flood damage claims were excluded from the policies. Six Flags' lease was terminated in 2009 during the company's own bankruptcy proceedings. The Industrial Development Board of New Orleans spent the next 15 years as the reluctant owner of a decaying amusement park that nobody could agree on what to do with. Proposals came and went. Nickelodeon, an outlet mall, a sports complex, a new theme park, a film studio. Each one collapsed before construction began. "The neighbors here, we get excited when we hear the news," said Kenny Guidry, a local resident who has lived near the site since 1990. But for some reason, those plans don't follow through. So basically, I'm going to believe it when I see the pilings going down and the structures come up. In the interim, alligators, cottonmouth snakes, wild boars, and vultures effectively took over the park's 220 acres. Urban explorers documented the decay in photographs and videos that circulated widely online, making Six Flags New Orleans one of the most visited abandoned sites in the country, conceptually if not physically. Production companies periodically leased it as a filming location, generating revenue while actual redevelopment remained theoretical. Demolition finally began in November 2024, nearly 20 years after the storm. The Mega Zeph came down in February 2025. Developer Bayou Phoenix has plans for a mixed-use complex on the site. Whether it materializes this time, the residents of eastern New Orleans have learned from experience to reserve judgment. Number 1, Heritage USA, Fort Mill, South Carolina. Heritage USA was not your standard theme park. built by televangelist Jim Bakker and his Praise the Lord ministry, known as PTL, in the late 1970s, Heritage USA in Fort Mill, South Carolina, was a Christian-themed resort and entertainment complex that, at its peak in the mid-1980s, was attracting more than 6 million visitors annually. That made it the third most visited tourist attraction in the United States, behind only Walt Disney World and Disneyland. That number is not a typo. 6 million visitors a year, drawn to a religious resort in South Carolina, built on the power of Jim Bakker's television ministry and the remarkable fundraising machine he had assembled through the PTL Club broadcast. The complex included a hotel called the Heritage Grand, a waterslide park called Heritage Island, a shopping area, condominiums, camping facilities, and various faith-based attractions. Bakker envisioned it as a Christian city, a total environment where people of faith could vacation, live, and be entertained without ever feeling out of step with their beliefs. And for a while, it worked on a scale that was genuinely astonishing. The mechanism behind it, however, was fraudulent. To fund expansion, including a new building called Heritage Grand Towers, Bakker's organization sold lifetime partnerships to PTL donors. These partnerships promised access to the resort's facilities for a fixed number of days each year in perpetuity. The problem was that PTL sold far more partnerships than there were accommodations. Hundreds of thousands of people paid for access to rooms that did not exist and could not have existed even if the expansion had been completed. In 1987, Jessica Hahn publicly alleged that Jim Bakker had sexually assaulted her in 1980. The ensuing scandal led to Bakker's resignation from PTL. Federal prosecutors then pursued the financial crimes. In 1989, Bakker was convicted on 24 counts of fraud and conspiracy related to the lifetime partnership scheme. He was initially sentenced to 45 years in prison, a sentence later reduced significantly on appeal, and ultimately served approximately 5 years. PTL filed for bankruptcy. Heritage USA, which had been built on television donations and fraudulent financing, began falling apart almost immediately. Various organizations attempted to continue operations under new management. A group called New Covenant Church briefly took over portions of the property. The water park sections were reopened sporadically. None of it held together. By the early 1990s, the complex was largely abandoned. The Heritage Grand Hotel was eventually demolished. The unfinished Heritage Grand Towers construction, the very building whose funding had constituted the fraud, stood as a concrete skeleton for years before it too was taken down. Portions of the property were purchased by other developers over the years, with some structures repurposed for new uses and others simply demolished. A residential community developed on part of the land. The grand, strange, gilded Christian resort that Jim Bakker had assembled over the course of a decade, and that had, however improbably, become the third most visited tourist destination in America, was taken apart piece by piece and absorbed into more ordinary uses. At its height, Heritage USA was simultaneously a genuine cultural phenomenon and an ongoing fraud. 6 million people a year visited a resort financed by money collected from television viewers who were told it would be used to build something permanent. When Bakker fell, it turned out the permanence had always been borrowed. "I am not perfect," Bakker said in 1987. The empire he'd built and lost in South Carolina suggested that not perfect was doing a significant amount of heavy lifting. What Heritage USA illustrates, beyond the fraud, beyond the spectacle, is how completely an institution can vanish when the single personality holding it together is removed. Without Bakker, the mechanisms that had built Heritage USA simply ran in reverse, and within a few years, there was almost nothing left to show for one of the stranger chapters in American entertainment history. From hurricane damage to bankruptcy, from parks built on burial grounds to water parks that Disney quietly forgot about, from a comic strip that retired too early to a televangelist who didn't know when to stop, these 10 places all had their moment. They were built with genuine ambition, loved by real people, and then left behind for reasons ranging from natural disaster to corporate indifference to outright fraud. The thing about an abandoned amusement park is that it still has the bones of something that mattered. The rides, the midways, the faded signs, and rusted Ferris wheels. They're all still there, just quieter than they used to be. Some of these places got second lives. Some are still waiting for one, and some are just slowly becoming part of the landscape again, which is what tends to happen when you build something big and then stop taking care of it. If you enjoyed this one, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more where this came from.